Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our second lecture of this season. I'm delighted tonight to welcome Jonathon Porritt, who, as I'm sure you know, has been a distinguished writer, broadcaster, campaigner on climate change and sustainability for some, I think, 50 years now. He joined the Green Party way back in 1974, and by 1979, I think I'm right in saying, he was writing their election manifesto. However, this manifesto was not altogether well received and was dismissed as utopian and totally detached from reality. But 50 years on today, many of its policies have become mainstream and have been accepted by all the major parties. He supported the Greens in the recent general election and was actively involved in helping a record 4 Green MPs to be elected, which is a great achievement with our electoral system. As well as the Green Party, Jonathon is involved in a huge range of organisations: Friends of the Earth, the World Wildlife Fund, Population Matters, Forum for the Future, Make Votes Matter, Compassion for World Farming, the Blue Marine Foundation, and many others. Yet, has still found time to be Chancellor of Keele University for 10 years, I think. So I think it's quite an achievement. He is, I believe, has been not just a leading light, but the leading light over the past years in alerting us to the dangers of climate change. His excellent book, Hope in Hell, which he will be signing copies of afterwards, is a powerful call to action on the climate emergency. Jonathon's always tried to be optimistic and not to make everything doom and gloom, but about our chances of tackling climate change successfully. But, as he says, I genuinely can't recall ever feeling the same intense combination of despair and hope. Please welcome Jonathon Porritt.
No, I can vouch for that. It's me who had the glass of wine, so hope that's all right for the rest of the proceedings this evening. Well, I'm delighted to be here, and thank you very much for that very generous introduction. It is true, when you've been around for 50 years, there's plenty to play with. When I look back over that time, I have to say it's a very mixed record, really, in terms of things achieved and improvements made, a difference to what prevailing reality looks like today, and it's not a happy picture. We were talking about whether or not it's possible to be optimistic about the world that confronts us now, or whether the onrush of so many of these really seriously disturbing scientific data points about the climate and nature emergency and so on make it impossible to provide a sense of orthodox hope about a better world. And I reflect on this a lot because I've spent most of my life trying to find those reasons to be hopeful. Don't call myself an optimist, by the way, because I think optimists are people whose capacity to understand the world as it really is severely diminished. But I don't call myself a pessimist either, because pessimists tend to be people who want to go to that dark side of what is happening and don't really want to look at all the reasons why we should still be hopeful about a better future. So I'm not a pessimist-optimist person. I'm on the spectrum of hopefulness, and to what extent can we legitimately be hopeful about a livable, compassionate, good world being available to us and all future generations. That's my scale, not the optimism-pessimism one. And it is really difficult. It gets harder every year because as we continue to do less than we should be doing every year, when you do a kind of audit at the end of that year, you come to the conclusion that the space available to us to make it possible to deliver that better world just gets smaller. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the doom and gloom stuff going on at the moment, you'll be relieved to know, but a couple of data points just to put us in the right place as to where we are. 2023, emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, which are causing the climate problem, as you know, were higher in 2023 than in any preceding year. And that's nearly 10 years on from the 2015 Paris Conference of the Parties, which of course asked every government to do what it could to restrict those emissions to make sure that we got back into something resembling balance in terms of the loading of these gases in the atmosphere. So as we head towards the latest Conference of the Parties in, God help us, Baku in Azerbaijan, in a few weeks' time, the scientific reality tells us something that doesn't look very good at all. And 2023-2024, climatically speaking, has been an utter nightmare for people to deal with. The number of extreme temperatures that have been broken, weather disasters, weather climate-related disasters of one kind or another, the huge economic implications of these disasters, the number of people's lives who have been shattered by climate extremes of one kind or another. It has been, without a shadow of doubt, the worst year ever. It is unlikely that that will be reflected in COP29, to use the jargon, Conference of the Parties 29. There have been 29 of these wretched events since the signing of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change back in 1992. The likelihood of this one doing anything different and breaking through is very remote. I have to tell you that. That's probably the reality of where we are today. So how do we do this balancing act? And this is a really difficult thing for all of us to get our heads around. So I'm just going to share just a couple of tiny little insights. You probably remember 2022, Pakistan suffered the worst ever flooding in its history. 31% of the landmass of Pakistan was affected by floodwaters in varying degrees of severity. So some looking a little bit like the way the UK looks at the moment, but other parts of Pakistan, particularly in the northern territories and Baluchistan and elsewhere, devastated by floodwaters. And the economic impacts of that and on the agriculture of Pakistan have been astonishing. It's very difficult to put a dollar value on the damage done because most of the farmers, or many of the farmers affected by that, wouldn't necessarily be in the cash economy. They'd be working as part of a local economy, providing the agricultural resources for local communities, for people, and so on. Something like 25% of the people affected by those floods in 2022 are still suffering from that climate-related disaster. So that's one story about Pakistan. And you, I imagine, many of you will remember that moment. It was pretty shocking when we looked at the visuals. Now I'm going to give you a data point that I can absolutely guarantee, unless we've got a few Pakistan specialists in the audience this evening, which you never know, we might have, but I can guarantee that you will not have necessarily clocked over the course of the last 9 months. So when President Putin decided that the best thing he could do for the world would be to invade Ukraine, like most countries, Pakistan suffered enormously. Prices of energy just rocketed. They have very few of their own homegrown indigenous sources of energy, fossil fuels or anything else. They have some hydropower, which has been incredibly helpful, but prices rocketed. And the consequence of that was that for the next 2 years, energy use in Pakistan went down by 10%. Now, in a country where you've got chronic poverty, if you see energy consumption reducing, per capita consumption reducing, you know this is not necessarily a good thing. But the Pakistani nation and the Pakistani people are astonishingly resilient. They don't see the world necessarily the way we see it. And here's something which I think should astonish everybody and cheer up everybody. So in the last 9 months in Pakistan, the equivalent of nearly a third of its total energy consumption has been installed as solar power as a response to this energy crisis in Pakistan. So total energy consumption in Pakistan, I won't go geeky on you, is roughly 46 gigawatts per annum. It's tiny per capita energy consumption. It's a very poor country. It does not use a great deal of energy. And energy is as critical to Pakistan and its people as any country on the earth. So total of 46 gigawatts is the total annual energy consumption. In the last 9 months, 13 gigawatts, that's not quite a third, but 30% of total energy consumption in Pakistan has been installed as solar panels on roofs of people's houses, businesses, facilities, hotels, hospitals, whatever you like, courtesy of China. And China sells the world incredibly cheap solar panels. And when Putin's war in Ukraine started to wreak havoc on the Pakistan economy, instead of waiting around for the World Bank or UK aid or anybody else, resilient citizens in Pakistan said, oh my God, what are we going to do? And because China is now flooding the market with very cheap solar panels, Pakistani entrepreneurs said, we'll have a bit of that. In fact, we'll have a lot of it. And starting immediately after the Putin invasion, they've been investing more and more in solar panels and simply self-installing on their own homes, businesses, offices, factories, etc. By the end of next year, so by the end of 2025, 80% of Pakistan's energy needs will be met by solar power. Now, I can guarantee you don't know that, because who would ever tell us about this? Why do we not hear these stories? Well, possibly because we don't really like China. And there's a thing about China, which is that China obviously is the biggest problem from the point of view of climate change because of all the emissions from its coal-fired power stations. And it's true that China, of course, with its 1.3 billion citizens, continues to invest a lot in new energy systems of one kind or another. Coal as a new system in China is becoming increasingly irrelevant. China is investing more aggressively in renewable energy than any other country in the world. Solar and wind in particular, but some new hydro schemes, a bit controversial there, but has probably accepted the inevitability of the end of the age of fossil fuels more readily than we have, more readily than China itself, as it was 10 years ago, because they've been through this revolution, much more readily than the United States, much more readily than countries like Australia that are still stuck in a kind of fossil fuel illusion about what the future of the world looks like. So we don't like China. So when China does the job, and through what we would call here in the UK, brilliant innovation and mass industrial development, which is what they've done with their solar industry, we don't really like that. That's not really the way we see the future of the world. China's still on the naughty step, still part of the bad guys. And yet this access to remarkably cheap Chinese solar panels, very high quality, by the way. Please don't think any longer that these are kind of shoddy, poorly performing panels. This is top-notch technology going into many of these countries today, including many countries in Africa. I won't go through the stats for Africa because you'd all get very bored. But China is really helping on this transition in a way that we probably feel a bit uncomfortable about, including myself, because China as a country, for me, is massively problematic with an absolutely horrendous human rights record, totally abhorrent abuse of its own people, and in particular of many of its ethnic minorities, including the Uyghurs in northeast China, which leaves most of us thinking this country, why would anybody want to do business with this country? And that's our dilemma. How do we do business with countries like that when we know that they can help with the transition for the global economy far more than we can? Now, don't get me wrong, I welcome the fact that we now have a semi-civilized government in power. I'm going to be very politically tendentious here. I welcome the fact that we have seen the back of 14 years of conservative dysfunctionality and an utter betrayal of everything that green politics stands for, and indeed our role in the world as a leader on climate change. In 2010, when David Cameron was elected and was in coalition with the Lib Dems, the UK was seen as one of the leading countries for international leadership on climate change, right up there, doing more than most countries. And I saw this for myself as chair of the Sustainable Development Commission and working closely with the Labour government at that time. In 10 years after that, 2010 to 2020, the Conservatives have pretty much wiped all of that out, especially after they got to be in complete control. They had 5 years where they had to occasionally be polite to the Lib Dems. It was a sorry story between 2010 and 2015, and particularly painful for the Lib Dems. They've just about come out of that now, but they still had to defer occasionally to the civilizing influence of the Lib Dems for the first 5 years, 2010 to 2015. In 2015, they just went for it. They just killed the low-carbon agenda here in the UK. For all the bluster of Boris Johnson and others. I'll give you one proof point about this, just so that I don't have to dwell on it any longer. In 2015, the Conservatives, after the election in 2015, decided they would do away with something called the zero carbon homes agenda. This was something that was introduced by Labour, which the Conservative Lib Dem coalition stuck with up until 2015. In 2015, they got rid of it completely. The Code for Sustainable Homes was just taken out of the system completely. Had we stuck with that code in 2015, 9 years on, every single new home here in the UK today would be a net zero home. Every single home. Affordable, social housing, for rent, private, whatever it might be. Every single home would have had to have met that standard. So people who tell me occasionally these things come and they go and it doesn't really matter, I look back now over that extraordinary time where the Conservatives just undid 15 years of solid professional work with built environment specialists and experts to build the code which would have given us now near net zero homes across the entire country. And then I listened to David Miliband yesterday talking about what Labour is going to do to retrieve that lost decade, that lost 15 years. And guess what? It'll take another 15 years to get us back to where we would have been anyway. So never make light of this stuff. These political shifts are deep and problematic, and they make it harder for us to be hopeful about this better world that I think we're all anticipating could still be out there. So, Pakistan is an odd place to start, but we're so insular here in the UK, we tend not to think very much about what this transition is going to look like all around the world. And for me, if I'm trying to retain authentic reasons to be hopeful about a better world, I want to be hopeful about Pakistan as much as I want to be hopeful about the UK. I'm not sure I can be hopeful about the USA, certainly not until November. But I want to be hopeful about these other countries that are struggling with incredible poverty, debt problems, issues to do with public services, the like of which we can't understand. That's what authentic hope looks like for me. Not whether we could do it here in a relatively rich, in fact still very rich, theoretically, Western economy, but can we do it for the whole of the world today? That's really the story. So when I was asked what we might talk about this evening, what the title would be for my talk, I sort of thought, well, climate change has been hanging around in our world for a very long time. We hear endlessly about climate stories of one kind or another. We hear about different policy disputes, different scientific research data. We hear about how hard it's going to be to persuade people to live low-carbon lives because they're not certain it'll give them everything they're looking for in terms of their existing material standard of living. We hear all of this. The buzz goes on and on and on. And I know this because when I was director of Friends of the Earth in 1986, we launched the first ever global warming campaign, because that's what climate change was called back in the 1980s, global warming, in 1986. And I have watched this debate about climate change unfolding since that time. But we're at a completely different point now, and my title for my talk this evening is Climate Change Literally Changes Everything. And let me just very quickly expand on that. It changes everything because whatever happens next, everything changes. At the moment, climate change doesn't really change very much for people in the UK. Not really. Might make them feel a little bit nervous about the future. For parents, it probably makes them feel a lot more nervous about their children's prospects. For grandparents, probably close to panic about what will happen to their grandchildren. But it doesn't really change things for most UK citizens in terms of their day-to-day life. So we're still thinking about what climate change is going to do to us in the future, not what climate change is already doing to us now, today, in the present. And that makes it difficult because in the present, right now, people are facing very considerable difficulties, hardships. Our public services have been hollowed out. I won't go through the entire list of the legacy that we're currently facing, black holes et al. So it's hard for people up against that daily reality to think about something which they think is still only going to impact in the future and isn't impacting today. So when I suggest to people that climate change will change literally everything for the rest of every single human being's life on this planet, it's like this. Either we get a handle on this, we wrap our heads around what accelerating climate change looks like, what it means to get closer and closer to these tipping points where different systems begin to slide away beyond the point where we can control them, or we don't. Or we don't do what we need to do to get a handle on this. It's binary. It's one or the other. And briefly, the scenarios are, let us just hope this is the scenario that works for everybody. Just imagine, in 5 to 10 years' time, we have been compassionate enough, thoughtful enough, responsible enough to redirect our economies and our way of life so that we learn to cope with accelerating climate change and find ways of creating still a stable space for humankind for the future, indefinitely for the future. Just imagine that for a moment. Pakistan style, okay? Imagine we get our heads around it. We do it. We do this brilliant thing. We accommodate our current expectations about our quality of life and our material standard of living with the physical reality of accelerating climate change. You have to stretch your imagination here, everybody. Okay, it's not easy to do this, but I spend a lot of time doing this. Imagine we do it. Imagine we get to that point where we can still create really good, just, humane, sustainable lives for 8 billion people on this planet before we slide off into the climate apocalypse. Now, if we are going to do that, and say we do it, everything will change. Everything will change. Our economy will change. Our expectations as nation states will change. Our expectations and aspirations as individual citizens will change, because we certainly can't live the way we live today. The way we create and use energy will change. Our manufacturing industries will change. The way we grow, distribute, and eat food will change dramatically. Everything will change. Everything will change. And you can understand why that's a bit threatening to people who think the status quo is just a bit iffy, but we don't want that kind of change. But everything will change. And then go to the other scenario, which we have to briefly entertain, which is we don't rise to the challenge. We don't come up with proportionate decarbonization policies, strategies, action plans. So emissions of these greenhouse gases continue to increase year on year. The impact on natural systems continues to worsen year on year. We get closer and closer to certain tipping points year by year. So we don't do what we need to do. And then, of course, everything changes. Everything changes. Much more dramatically, much more traumatically for people, much more painfully than most people even want to begin to think about. So one way or the other, we get it sorted, we do it, it's brilliant, people are amazed. Or we don't do it, in which case we're on a very slippery slope. One way or the other, everything changes. Which is why it still honestly astonishes me that most people talk about climate change as some kind of marginal environmental issue. How can that be? There is literally nothing else going on in our world today apart from the possibility of nuclear war back in our midst again. There's literally nothing else which could possibly have the same effect on the whole of humankind as the climate crisis we face today. And we still treat it as a bit of an afterthought in the way we address these things. So it's a little bit difficult to stay hopeful against that backdrop because we're not sizing it properly. We're not accepting the dimensions of the challenge in the way that we really need to. We're not looking either at the full extent of the downside, which is not good, and we're not even celebrating the full extent of the upside, which is what would happen if we got it right. So we're stuck in this really weird place where things do tend to get worse year by year, and our response to that becomes increasingly less adequate. So that's why, just to finish my talk, because what I hope is we can get into some discussion about this and ask a lot of you how you feel about this. That's why, for me, I'm 74 years old. I joined the Green Party, as you said, in 1974. I have done pretty much everything in those 50 years that I could have done from a political point of view, NGO, campaigning, advising government, advising business, making films, writing books, blah-de-blah. And I've come to the realization now that although this is all good and really important, and we still need to go on working with business, and we still need to go on trying to lobby politicians, and there are some good ones out there that we now need to work on in particular, for me that no longer makes the difference it needs to make. So I've now changed my focus in the last year. I'm now working again with the Green Party. It's true, I had a very enjoyable 6 weeks working with different Green Party candidates in the run-up to the general election in July and watching 4 MPs getting elected, which was completely staggering for me and just wonderful. But I'm also working with organizations like Just Stop Oil, Defend Our Juries, and Extinction Rebellion. And that's because I know now all the consensus-based, mainstream, tactical routes to trying to change the system that I've been party to over 50 years can't possibly get stuff sorted in time. We've run out of time. We've just run out of time because we've wasted all these years. We haven't got the time to do it in that sort of way. Incremental improvement, accelerating, everybody feeling good about it, the changes and all the rest. We've lost all of that. We've run out of time. So for me, the reality now is very different. I'm in particular involved in a project, writing a book with Just Stop Oil, looking at 25 young Just Stop Oil campaigners who have been on the front line of climate campaigning over the last 18 months, 9 of whom are currently on remand or in prison, most of whom feel they don't have any choice because we have left them with no choice. Most of them don't feel good about this, and although they don't express as much anger about it, astonishingly to me, as much anger about it as I feel, you can't help but see in their testimonies a sense of betrayal. How our generations, have not done what we could and should have done to give the next generation and generations after them a reasonable prospect of a safe operating space for humankind. They articulate that very generously. They don't feel the same rage I feel. They're not filled with bile and hatred of our generation in a way that I think I probably expected. But they're just flattened by our inability to have done as little as we should have done. So I just want to open up that story this evening, because this is a really important moment to do it with people who have a lot of life experience. How do we, as older people now, get it right in terms of our own responsibilities, in terms of what young people might and do expect of us now? What is our moment of personal truth when it comes to sharing collective failure, which we have to do? We have to do. We wouldn't be in the position we're in today had we done it better. And I suppose it is quite personal, all of this, because you're bound to put this through the lens of individuals, our own children, grandchildren, if you have them, people you love, who you know are going to be massively affected by all of this. So when I say climate change changes literally everything, I don't just mean geopolitics, economics, all the rest of the way the world works, big security issues, macro this and macro that. I mean it changes everything in each one of us individually, and does not leave us the space not to find answers to these challenges. We don't have that space available to us any longer. We might have had it over many years, but we certainly don't have it any longer. So I'm hoping that's enough by way of introduction. Sorry, I forgot to look at my notes. I did have some notes, but somewhere down here. Oh God, Labour Party conference, forget that. No. That's probably more than enough. I hope to get a conversation going. Thank you.
Jonathon, thank you so much. That was brilliant. And I think it would have been a bit of an eye-opener for all of us, particularly for those of us who may once or twice have thought in the past, as you put it, that somehow, yes, climate change was happening, but was sort of a bit of a peripheral issue and we didn't need to worry too much. I think you've opened our eyes and made us realise just how serious the situation is. I'm sure lots of you have questions or comments you might like to make. Yes, gentlemen here. And can I just ask you, people are watching at home and also hopefully listening, but they can't use the microphone. No one can hear.
Jonathan, many months ago, I spoke to a journalist here, and I said, the only way you're going to get change in this country if the House of Commons roof falls in and they have to move out to another building, because that's the way I see it.
Well, I think I think the question there is, at what point is the House of Commons going to fall in on them? Because the House of Commons is in such physical disrepair and a health and safety site of ruination, frankly. No person should be asked to work in the House of Commons. So they are going to have to move. They put it off, as you know, for 25 years. They continue to put it off now. I don't know, maybe I'm misjudging Keir Starmer. Maybe he's going to be brave enough to say, okay, we have to sort this out. It is going to cost us 500 million, £500 million, to get this one sorted. And in the meantime, we're going to move Parliament around the 6 cities of the UK, which have previously been largely ignored by us down here in London. And we're going to arrange a schedule where we will take residence in Leeds in 2026, and in Manchester in 2027, and Edinburgh in 2028. And it probably takes 6-7 years, and that's how we're going to move the UK forward with serious democratic renewal. It's crazy to have dreams about politicians, isn't it? Because you know it ain't going to happen. But look, I wouldn't tie everything to the degree, to the speed with which the House of Commons collapses. But I do have a friend who works in a minister's office today, who likens the collapsing physical infrastructure of the House of Commons to the collapsing physical infrastructure of planet Earth, and derives a great deal of rather sad happiness from looking at these two collapse stories. So I would invite you to take that away and enjoy it too. Which one's going to go first, the House of Commons or the rest of life on Earth? Hopefully.
Your example from Pakistan is very impressive and, of course, striking. Very good way to start a talk such as yours. Can you say, is it possible to say briefly, what were the mechanisms in Pakistan that made that possible? What were the mechanisms in Pakistan, which is not, let's say, one of the most politically flexible countries in the developing world, that made it possible to have this remarkable change? To what extent was it, for instance, pushing by China, or what were the market forces, props, and so on?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That is the question. And I only came across this story a week ago, so I think I need to dig into it a little bit more. But I came across the story in a source, a research journal that I have a huge amount of respect for. So I don't feel exposed in sharing the story with you. But you're right, because what is it that made that possible? It absolutely, for certain, wasn't a huge flow of new international aid, saying, oh my God, poor Pakistan, look, we're going to have to do something about them. Bang, let's get this sorted. It wasn't anything to do with that. It definitely wasn't anything to do with the Pakistan government, because that is one of the most dysfunctional governments, notional democracies in the world today. It probably wasn't very much to do with the flows of finance that you might expect coming from bankers or people who think there's a bob to be made here and I can put my money in here. It was a lot to do with China subsidizing the sale of their panels. Let's make no bones about that. China's ruthless when it comes to building influence through its economic presence in different countries. You've probably heard of the Belt and Road Initiative that China has been advancing for the last 10 years to build its presence in the economies of up to 40 countries all around the world, mostly in the Southern Hemisphere, and mostly doing conventional, very damaging, destructive infrastructure. So if China wants to build its influence in the world today by subsidizing solar panels, I kind of feel, go for it. So much better than building new carbon-intensive infrastructure that we would have seen in the past. So I don't know the answer to your question, in all honesty. All I know is that the conventional explanations that one can give to this wouldn't work in this case. But I do know that desperation will have played a part in it. Because when energy prices shot up after the war, and they mostly found themselves without access to the kind of energy that would allow their businesses or their homes or anything to survive, let alone thrive, that they had to take those actions themselves. So this self-installation story is the bit I want to get after. Have we got to the point now where mass installation of rooftop solar is so simple that communities can come together, teach themselves how to do it, and roll it out across an entire community? If we've got to that point, wow, we're into some very, very interesting territory indeed. So I don't know the answer to your question. The only thing this article said was that the payback period for most people for this investment in their solar panels is between 4 and 5 years. So they will have worked unbelievably hard to get the money to buy the solar panels, but within 4 to 5 years they can pay that off. And don't forget, the alternative is a nightmare, because the grid doesn't work. They rely on generators. Generators rely on unbelievably expensive diesel, supplies of which have been very constrained in Pakistan over the last 3 or 4 years. So the alternative to the debt that they have incurred to get the panels up probably looks a lot better than relying on a generator-based diesel economy. But thank you. You've prompted me to go away and do a bit more work on it.
Hello.
I've been a greenie for 45 years and I've followed your progress and your career forever. What do we do about an economic system a neoliberal economic system which believes in growth and consumption forever?
Yeah. Okay. So you and I have been deliberating about that question for 45 years. I still find it really difficult to bring that into a talk like tonight, which is what is so interesting, because, okay, since you prompted me, I know that what I've been talking about tonight as the potential upside is still dependent on fairly conventional policies driving fairly conventional notions of economic growth. It's just that we're going to do it with alternative, green, renewable, super efficient sources of energy rather than with fossil fuels. But we're still going to use those super green alternative energy sources to drive growth rather than the fossil fuels. Now, we do get a big bang from that. We do actually start to decarbonize the economies, without which we can't entertain any prospects of a stable economy for people. So we get a huge uplift from that. But at the same time, if we're still wedded to a notion that the only way to progress prospects for people on this planet is through per capita increases in income and nationally increases in GDP, then we're still back in the same hole. And I'm constrained by that because I want people to feel a sense of the doability of what a more sustainable economy would look like. And then I think about the political complexity of what the doability of a genuinely sustainable economy would look like, which is not dependent on that insane growth-based, consumption-based economy. And I sort of think, are people, even now, can people hear this and cope with this and feel hopeful about it? So let me give you one tiny snapshot of this just to remind you how spiky, difficult this is. There are 1.5 billion vehicles on planet Earth today. They're 93% of which are internal combustion engine vehicles, petrol or diesel vehicles. The most hopeful prospect that we have in terms of decarbonizing that part of the transport system is to get rid of 1.4 billion diesel and petrol vehicles and replace them with 1.4 billion electric vehicles. That's what realism looks like if you're trying to make this stuff stick in a growth-based economy. And 1.4 billion electric vehicles is better than 1.4 billion internal combustion engine vehicles, but it still represents the end of a viable future for humankind. So what do I, as an advocate for change, do? Do I say, yep, let's concentrate on getting EVs rolled out and substituting them as fast as possible for 1.4 billion ICEs? Or do I say, which I do tend to do more often these days, no, stop and think. 1.4 billion EVs means the end of any prospect for a sustainable future for humankind. So don't pin all your hopes on EVs. I feel this. I'm a London cyclist, okay? I cycle around London, and every time I see a little green flash, I think, thank you. Thank you. The air I'm breathing here, and I've been a London cyclist 15 years. I don't live in London any longer, but I still cycle around London a lot. Every time I see a little green strip, I say, thank you. Thank you. Slightly less corruption of my lungs as I cycle around this city here. And then I kind of step back or stop in my bicycling tracks and I think, yeah, even so, what we really need is just far, far fewer vehicles in London, full stop. And then I know, oh, that's where the politics starts, because people don't feel comfortable there. So look, I'm owning up here to, I don't know whether we jump over the whole notion about the green transition and a new Green Deal and all the rest of it and just go straight hard to a no-growth, degrowth, dematerialized world, not based on consumption and prospects of economic growth, and bring more people into the sense of the doability of that. I don't know. I'm still a bit lost on that one. 45 years on.
Hi.
Oh my God.
Sorry, thank you very much. I'm just wondering, getting back to the Pakistan-China issue, how do you actually restructure and recalibrate China's influence in terms of being a global financial power, and at the heart of its power is its own economy, and the only reason that it seems to have such a hold on other economies, including places like, as you know, Sri Lanka. It now owns vast parts of Australia, Africa. It's got a hold in there. And how much, if you think about somewhere like Pakistan, and I've got some associations with Pakistan, so I understand where you're coming with that, and I understand the story behind it. And it's only because there is this disaster. How do you change the way that a nation like China thinks? Because they will get on the bandwagon of any type of economical situation going, but how do you change? At the moment, climate change is a very big part of that. It supports their industry. But really, if you think about luxury goods, it's still one of the biggest economies that buys the most incredible luxury goods, whether it's cars, whiskey, whatever. So they want really what the West has had in the past, and they still desire that. So how do you kind of balance this whole thing? I understand the situation in Pakistan, but are they just doing that simply because economically it serves their purpose? Where does that kind of sense of responsibility come into why one nation supports and serves another just because it's gone through a huge disaster?
Yeah. I think we have to try and take a historical sweep on this. What China is doing today is no different and no more calculating, callous, and destructive than everything we did as colonial powers going back many, many centuries. And certainly no more destructive than what the US imperium did when it set out to dominate the global economy in the 20th century. And I only suggest that because I do know from experience that the Chinese are more open to taking a historical perspective than most people in the West seem capable of doing. So what will change that in China? What will change that is what is actually happening now, which is Chinese politicians, bureaucrats, scientists have a much more acute sense of the degree to which their country and their civilization, because they would call it a civilization, is at risk because of accelerating climate change than any other nation on Earth. And for me, that's weirdly reassuring because we need nations to be seized by the degree to which whatever they think their role in the global economy might be, at whatever stage they're at their own historical economic trajectories, we need every single nation to understand the degree to which that trajectory is going to be fundamentally disrupted by the kind of climate change that we're talking about. And China, oh my God, I mean, I won't run, well, you probably know about this, but China is more at risk because of different threats from extreme climate change impacts than most countries around the world. The difference in China is they know that. So one of the reasons why they're trying to dominate the global renewable energy technologies is because they want to roll this out in China. It is very likely that they will ban the sale of any petrol and diesel vehicle in China from 2028 onwards. Gone. And in China, if you introduce a ban, sorry, you don't get to go around blowing up a few things or getting antsy about whether or not this is doable or clean air emission zones and all the rest of it. If China says you can't sell a single new petrol diesel vehicle after 2028, that's it. That's it. Now, why are they doing that? Yes, they want to dominate global EV sales around the world, but they do also want Chinese citizens to stop dying of air pollution. They're not completely callous and insensitive to the impacts that their growth curve has had. I really feel so compromised standing here and saying this, because what China stands for, as I said from a human rights point of view, is so awful to me, so inimical to everything that I stand for in terms of what any nation owes its own citizens, let alone those of other countries it's dealing with, that it's very hard to come across as a kind of advocate for what China's doing. But I think we do have to get this in perspective in terms of the historical sweep, as I mentioned, and the likelihood of China probably coming out of this rather better prepared for this necessarily decarbonized, dramatically different world than any other country I know at the moment. And that's not necessarily good news for the world as a whole, but whew, yeah. Can we have a few easy questions, do you think? I mean, we're really growth and China and everything else.
Yes, I'd like to ask you a question about, I think...
Oh, sorry, you're
yes.
next. I beg your pardon. I couldn't see where you were.
Right. I'm a member of Extinction Rebellion and defend our juries, and spend a lot of my time on non-violent direct action because, like you, I believe that we are running out of time and we have to start being visible and doing things non-violently and communicating that urgency more. And one thing that we don't have at the moment is any proper legislation in Parliament that would have prevented the issuing of all those licenses for fossil fuel developments and so on. The Climate and Nature Bill that is hoping to be reintroduced as a private member's bill that is gaining huge support now is one such thing that could raise the question and the debate nationally about the climate and nature crisis. Also, more of a campaign to reduce the terrible legislation that the Tories introduced about protest law, which I've been a victim of myself.
Yep, we find ourselves in complete agreement. How will those initiatives prosper under a Labour government?
Well, we as a community could participate in those campaigns, couldn't we?
We could. No, we could. And I urge people to be open-hearted about the ways in which these organizations, Just Stop Oil, Defend Our Juries, Extinction Rebellion, to be open-hearted about what they're doing and not to go quickly to a position that says, well, yeah, I get where they're coming from, but can't agree with their tactics. Sorry, that's just not right. And closing down, then, from a personal point of view, a personal moral point of view. Closing down because you don't approve of tactics taken by individuals or organizations, whatever it might be. Keep open-hearted. Stay open to what it is that these organizations are trying to do. And if I may, the quickest route into that open-heartedness is via Defend Our Juries. This is an organization that has only been in existence for 3 years. It was set up initially to support the work of an amazing woman called Trudy Warner, who simply set out to remind jurors that every single person sitting on a jury in a High Court trial has the right to make a judgment about their verdict on the basis of their conscience. And that is written into British law. And she sat outside the Old Bailey initially, holding up a sign using the words that are inscribed on the wall of the Old Bailey. And as you know, she became a victim of an unbelievably punitive, repressive attempt by the Conservative government to close her down and close down those who sought to defend the right of jurors to make judgments according to their conscience. And we're 3 years on. Defend Our Juries has won that case. Trudy Warner is now a free person in that respect. All sanctions have been withdrawn. But of course, Defend Our Juries has moved on to say, yes, but look at what is happening in our courts of law, where defendants are not allowed to explain what their motivation might be, not allowed to talk about the reality of climate and nature emergencies today, not allowed to speak to this reality from a legal perspective. And there are several judges who have gone out of their way to make that impossible and then to impose these astonishing sentences. There are 26 Just Stop Oil campaigners in prison at the moment, and some of the sentences just beg a belief. So on Friday, 2 of the Just Stop Oil campaigners, Phoebe Plummer and Anna Holland, are being sentenced at Southwark Crown Court for their action throwing baked beans on the protective screen in front of Van Gogh's The Sunflowers. Tomato soup. There were no beans in it. And I don't know where you go on that, because that action is is pretty in your face, and a lot of people were really, really angry and cross about that. But we've reached the point now where we need to listen much more attentively and compassionately to the voices of young campaigners and be open-hearted about what it is they're trying to do. And I'm writing a reference for Anna Holland for the case for the sentencing on Friday, because it moves me deeply. And what really moves me is the fact that this concept of intergenerational justice, where I thought throughout my life that I was the one who had the obligation to protect the rights and interests of future generations, and now I've ended up 50 years on realizing that these young campaigners are the ones who are doing the heavy lifting to protect my rights and interests, and my children's rights and interests. So I'm not going to go further than that. I'm just going to ask you to keep your heart and your mind and your compassion for people open. Listen to the words. Don't listen. Please don't listen to the Daily Mail. Whatever else you do, just don't listen to the Tory right-wing press, because it's utterly, utterly hateful.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. The last question. I feel terribly bad now about offering you a lift in my car to the tube.
Please don't. It took a long time to walk up the hill.
If there's anywhere that is leading the way in overconsumption in the world, it surely must be the USA. And you haven't actually said much about them, but where do you think
I can't bear to
we stand with trying to influence them in all this?
I just want to put that question on hold for a few more weeks. Honestly, the prospect of Trump Mark II is off any known scale of scary realpolitik and so devastating from so many points of view. So let me just end on an upbeat note. I danced with joy when Joe Biden was persuaded to stand down as the Democrats' presidential candidate, and the work started then to get Kamala Harris adopted as the candidate. I danced because I knew that there was at least a chance that we would end up with a candidate being elected as president, who would give everybody a hope that many of these issues could be addressed. Okay, we've been talking about climate change this evening. There are so many other issues in America. And nothing that has happened since then has led me to feel any the less upbeat about her candidacy and the prospect still of the Democrats winning this election in November. And I will just end on one thing, if I may. If that does happen, it's because of women. It's going to be because of women. Because around the United States, the reality of what has happened to the Republican Party, from its perspective on the role of women in society, and its determination to take women back in many respects to an age that most people can't even believe, and Roe v. Wade is but the sort of visible bit of this. The story I'm hearing is that women are now organizing themselves around these target states in a way that has never happened before. And I'm holding out. You can see how desperate I am to keep hopeful in this crazy world. I'm holding out for an astonishing victory for Kamala Harris, which will be large enough, one, to stop Trump saying he's been cheated again, so it's got to be big. Two, that delivers both the House of Representatives and the Senate in what is called a trifecta, which will then allow us 4 years of coherent US government to help contribute to a better world. I want to send you all away this evening with a message of hope.
I think there was one. Can we have a very quick
Okay,
question and a quick answer?
I'm sorry, because you have sort of finished, but
I have finished.
Just to help us, what can we do? We can all reduce our consumption, but apart from that, what, as old people, should we do?
Well, speak for yourself.
No. We are old. Oh my God, okay. You were so nearly wrapping it up, bang on time. And
Just a quick.
yeah, it's not quite that quick.
No.
I'm going to make myself unpopular now. Please don't worry about the little consumer-based differences you might be able to make. Getting yourself a little stripy EV instead of an ICE, internal combustion engine. Eating less meat per week, flying less, only having one holiday a year instead of X. Please don't worry about all that stuff. It's all good. Do it all. Don't tell anybody about it, and don't take any credit for it, because it doesn't matter a jot. Because these are much bigger forces going on in our world today. Only two things really matter, if I may. One, do you know, as an old person, your words, not mine, do you know where all your investments are placed today? Do you know that? Do you know whether or not the investments you've made during the course of your earning life are still contributing to undermining life on Earth, or are actually now giving us a reasonable prospect of a better world? That is not an easy question to answer, by the way, and I'm not saying that lightly, because I know how hard it is to get that right and to find a way of meeting your own expectations and needs as a retired or not active older person, active working person. And it doesn't come easily because I'm about to swear, but I won't, the bloody world of investment and asset managers, they want to make it as hard as they possibly can, and they're a bunch of venal, self-interested, profiteering scumbags for the most part. So you need to pick your investment partner and your advisors really carefully. That's the first thing. Secondly, very quickly, open-heartedness will, for some people, include generosity and giving, and making sure that whatever you've got by way of your own philanthropic contributions to making the world a better place for people, making sure that your own philanthropic contributions, doesn't matter how big or small they are, go to places that are going to make a difference. So I really do promise you, Defend Our Juries is the cornerstone of what a decent, civilized, democratic society is going to look like for us here in the UK. I'm not saying you should go there, but I'm saying you should think about some radical routes to philanthropy as well as the more safe routes, as it were. So, there you go.
Jonathan, thank you very much. That was extremely stimulating, if occasionally alarming. Thank you. Jonathan, as we said earlier, is going to sign copies of his book. You're all welcome to join us for a glass of wine, whether or not you happen to be members of the institution. So, please come next door, talk to Jonathan some more there, and let's thank him for an excellent talk.
Thank you.